In the remote village of Grim Hollow, nestled deep within the Blackwood Forest, the villagers lived in perpetual fear. A thick fog often blanketed the village, curling through the cobblestone streets like a living thing. The forest was dense, ancient, and held a dark secret that none dared speak of openly: the curse of the werewolves. It began centuries ago when the village was still young. A group of hunters had ventured into the forest, seeking to slay a great wolf that had been terrorizing the livestock. But they found not a beast, but a man, one of their own, lost years before. His eyes glowed with a predatory hunger, his nails were like claws, and his teeth, sharp and elongated, dripped with fresh blood. They tried to reason with him, but he attacked with a ferocity that no human should possess. The hunters fought back, and in the struggle, the cursed man was slain. But as he lay dying, he whispered a curse upon the village, a curse that would plague their bloodline for eternity. From that night on, every full moon, the villagers would hear the haunting howls of the cursed. It started with one or two, but soon it was clear that the curse was spreading. Anyone who wandered too far into the forest, or even those who lingered too long by its edge, risked being marked. The transformation was slow, agonizing, and irreversible. The villagers tried everything to break the curse: prayers, rituals, even offerings to dark gods, but nothing worked. The werewolves became an ever-present shadow, a curse that none could escape. Families hid their loved ones during the full moon, chaining them in basements or locking them in cellars. But sometimes, even that wasn't enough. The beast within would tear through flesh and bone, leaving behind nothing but a bloody ruin. The village elder, an old woman named Alara, was the only one who seemed to know more than she let on. She spoke of ancient rites, of a way to perhaps end the curse, but she was always vague, cryptic, as if revealing too much would bring even greater doom upon them all. One night, during a particularly harsh winter, when the moon was full and the wind howled like a pack of wolves, a stranger arrived in Grim Hollow. He was tall, cloaked in dark furs, and his eyes gleamed with a cold light. He claimed to be a hunter, one who had tracked the curse across many lands, seeking to end it. The villagers, desperate for any hope, welcomed him, but Alara warned them to be cautious, for not all hunters were what they seemed. The stranger paid no heed to her warnings. He claimed that to break the curse, they needed to retrieve a relic buried deep within the heart of the Blackwood Forest, in a place where the moonlight never touched. Despite Alara's protests, the villagers agreed to follow him into the forest. The journey was perilous, filled with dangers both natural and supernatural. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around them, as if trying to keep them from their goal. Finally, they reached a clearing where the ground was bare, save for a single, ancient tree, gnarled and twisted. Beneath its roots, the stranger said, lay the relic, a silver amulet said to have the power to cleanse the curse. But as the villagers dug, the ground seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The earth itself resisted their efforts, as if protecting the cursed object. When they finally unearthed it, the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. The stranger reached for the amulet, but as his fingers closed around it, a change came over him. His eyes glowed with a terrible light, and he began to laugh, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the forest. Alara, who had followed them in secret, stepped forward. I warned you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Not all hunters are what they seem. The stranger turned to face her, his form shifting, growing larger, more monstrous. You were right, old woman, he snarled, his voice now deep and guttural. But it's too late now. The curse will spread, and soon all will fall under its sway. With a final, savage growl, the stranger's transformation completed, revealing him to be the first of the cursed, the one who had laid the curse upon the village all those years ago. He had returned, not to break the curse, but to ensure it would never end. The villagers, frozen in terror, could do nothing as the beast lunged at them, teeth bared, claws outstretched. The clearing was soon filled with the sounds of battle, of screams and howls, as the cursed hunter exacted his vengeance. When the sun rose the next day, Grim Hollow was silent. The villagers who had ventured into the forest were never seen again, and those who remained in the village spoke of a terrible, new presence in the forest, one that could never be escaped. Alara, the last of the old blood, took the amulet and returned to the village, knowing that the curse was now stronger than ever. The moon would rise again, and with it, the howls of the cursed would fill the night air. But there was still one secret she had kept a final, desperate hope hidden deep within the ancient texts. But to reveal it would mean risking everything, for the curse had its roots in something far older, far darker than anyone had imagined. And so, the village of Grim Hollow waited, the shadow of the curse hanging over them, as the full moon began to rise once more. The morning after the villagers disappeared, Grim Hollow was eerily quiet. The frost that coated the village seemed thicker than usual, as if the very air had frozen in fear. Those who had stayed behind huddled in their homes, their minds filled with visions of what had happened in the Blackwood Forest. Alara, the village elder, knew that time was running out. The cursed hunter had returned, and the relic of silver amulet meant to cleanse the curse had only strengthened his dark power. She clutched the amulet tightly, feeling the cold metal burn against her skin. This was no ordinary object, it was a key, but to what? She could only guess. As she sat in her dimly lit cottage, she pored over ancient texts, searching for answers. The pages were brittle and yellowed with age, written in a language that had long since fallen out of use. But Alara could read them. She had spent her life studying the old ways, preparing for a day she had always feared would come. The text spoke of the cursed hunter, a man named Thorn, who had once been a protector of Grim Hollow before his tragic fall into darkness. Betrayed by those he trusted, Thorn had sought vengeance, and in his rage, he made a pact with the dark spirits of the Blackwood. The spirits had given him power, but at a terrible cost his humanity. The curse he laid upon the village was his final act of retribution, a curse that would live on through the ages. But the texts also hinted at a hidden power within the amulet, something even Thorn didn't know. It was said that the amulet could open a gateway, not just to break the curse, but to undo it entirely. However, the gateway would lead to a place known only as the Veiled Realm, where the boundaries between life and death, between man and beast, were blurred beyond recognition. Alara knew what she had to do, but the journey would be perilous. The Veil was a place of endless night, where shadows moved of their own accord, and whispers of lost souls filled the air. It was a place from which few ever returned, and those who did were never the same. She couldn't do it alone. She needed someone strong, someone with a pure heart, untainted by the curse. But as she looked around the village, she saw only fear and despair. The people of Grim Hollow had suffered for too long. They had given up hope. All except one. In the farthest corner of the village lived a young man named Kale, an outsider who had come to Grim Hollow a few years ago, seeking refuge from his own troubled past. Kale was different from the others. His eyes held a quiet strength, and there was something about him that Alara couldn't quite place. He had survived the full moons unscathed, and though the villagers whispered about him, they kept their distance, fearing what they did not understand. Alara made her way to Kale's cottage, the amulet hidden beneath her cloak. She found him sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, as if searching for answers of his own. When she explained what she had discovered, Kale listened in silence, his expression unreadable. "You want me to go into the Veil?" Kale finally said, his voice calm but with an edge of disbelief. "To face whatever is on the other side and try to break a curse that has haunted this village for centuries." Alara nodded. "You're the only one who can. The amulet's power can only be wielded by someone who hasn't been touched by the curse. The Veil is dangerous, but if you succeed, you could free us all." Kale looked into her eyes, searching for any hint of deception, but found none. "And if I fail, then the curse will consume us all, and the darkness in the forest will spread beyond Grim Hollow. But I believe you can do this, Kale. There's something about you, something the curse hasn't touched." Kale stood, his decision made. "Then I'll go, but I need to know why me. Why haven't I been affected?" Alara hesitated, then handed him the amulet. "I don't know for certain, but I suspect it has to do with your past. The curse feeds on fear, on guilt, on darkness in the soul. You've faced your own demons, and somehow, you've kept them at bay." Kale took the amulet, feeling its weight in his hand. "How do I find the Veil?" "The entrance is deep in the forest, where the trees grow so close together that no light can pass through. The amulet will guide you." With a final nod, Kale left the cottage and made his way toward the Blackwood Forest, the amulet glowing faintly in the dim light of the moon. The villagers watched him go, their eyes filled with a mix of hope and dread. As he ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and the shadows lengthened. The trees seemed to whisper his name, calling him deeper into the darkness. The amulet pulsed with an eerie light, guiding him to a place where the air was thick with the scent of decay. Finally, he reached a clearing, much like the one where the cursed hunter had been unmasked. But this one was different. In the center stood an ancient stone archway, covered in vines and moss, its surface etched with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Kale stepped forward, the amulet growing warmer in his hand. The archway seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and as he passed through it, the world around him shifted. The air became heavy, the sky darkened, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to ripple like water. He had entered the Vale. The landscape was a twisted reflection of the world he had left behind, familiar, yet distorted, with shadows that moved on their own and shapes that flickered at the edge of his vision. The forest was alive with whispers, voices that spoke of forgotten sins, of betrayals, and of a hunger that could never be sated. As Kale pressed on, he felt the weight of the curse pressing down on him, trying to break his resolve. But he held the amulet tightly, its light guiding him through the darkness. And then he saw a figure in the distance, shrouded in shadow. As he approached, the figure turned to face him, and Kale felt a chill run down his spine. It was Thorn, the cursed hunter, his eyes glowing with a terrible light. But something was different. The curse had twisted him, made him more beast than man, and yet there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a trace of the man he once was. "You've come to break the curse," Thorn said, his voice a low growl. "But you don't understand. This curse is older than you can imagine, born from a darkness that cannot be undone. You'll only make it worse." Kale raised the amulet, its light shining brighter. "I have to try. The people of Grim Hollow don't deserve this." Thorn laughed, a sound filled with bitterness and despair. "You think you can save them? You think you can save yourself? The curse is part of you now, just as it's part of me. It feeds on your fears, on your doubts. You can't escape it." But Kale stood firm. "I'm not here to escape. I'm here to end it." With those words, he stepped forward, the amulet glowing with a blinding light. The shadows recoiled, and for a moment, Kale thought he saw something in Thorn's eyes, something almost human. But then the darkness surged forward, swallowing the light, and Kale felt himself being pulled deeper into the Vale. The ground beneath him gave way, and he fell into a void of endless night, the amulet slipping from his grasp. As he fell, the whispers grew louder, echoing in his mind, and he realized with a sinking dread that Thorn was right. The curse was not just around him, but within him. And now it was his turn to face the darkness. In Grim Hollow, the villagers waited, watching the forest for any sign of Kel's return. But as the hours passed, hope began to fade. The full moon rose high in the sky, casting long shadows over the village. And then, in the distance, they heard it, the haunting howl of a wolf, echoing through the trees. But this time, it was not alone. The howl was joined by others, a chorus of voices that filled the night with a sound that was both terrifying and strangely familiar. Alara stood at the edge of the forest, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what had happened. The curse had not been broken, and now it was stronger than ever. But there was still one final secret, one last hope hidden deep within the ancient texts. A way to not just end the curse, but to banish it forever. But to do so would require a sacrifice greater than any she had ever imagined. And so, the village of Grim Hollow waited, the shadow of the curse hanging over them like a shroud, as the full moon began to wane, and the howls of the cursed filled the night. As the howls of the cursed echoed through the night, despair settled over Grim Hollow. The villagers, huddled in their homes, felt the weight of the curse pressing down on them more heavily than ever. They had pinned their last hope on Kale, but now it seemed that he, too, had fallen to the darkness. But in the quiet of her cottage, Alara refused to give up. She knew that the curse was powerful, ancient, and deeply rooted in the very land they lived on. But she also knew that light could be found in the darkest of places. She had spent her life studying the old ways, learning the secrets of the curse. And there was still one final possibility, a way to end the curse for good. The text she had studied spoke of a ritual, a powerful incantation that could sever the curse at its source. It required the purest of hearts, a sacrifice of great personal cost, and the relic thorns amulet used in the right way. Alara knew what she had to do. She gathered her things and made her way to the ancient stone archway in the heart of the Blackwood Forest. The night was dark and cold, the full moon casting an eerie light over the twisted trees. She could feel the presence of the cursed all around her, but she pressed on, determined. When she reached the archway, she found it glowing faintly, a portal to the Vale still open. The air was thick with the same sense of foreboding she had felt the night before, but this time, there was something else. Hope. Alara took a deep breath and stepped through the archway, into the Vale. The world shifted around her, the forest transforming into a twisted reflection of itself. Shadows moved like living creatures, and the whispers of the lost echoed in her ears. But she focused on the task at hand, knowing that time was running out. As she ventured deeper into the Vale, she saw him, Kale. He was kneeling on the ground, surrounded by shadows, his head bowed as if in defeat. The amulet lay at his feet, its light dimming. Kale, Alara called out, her voice strong despite the fear gnawing at her. It's not over. We can still end this. Kale looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. I tried, Alara, but the curse, it's inside me now. Thorn was right. It's too strong. Alara shook her head, stepping closer. No, Kale, the curse may be strong, but so are you. It feeds on fear and despair, but you have the power to overcome it. Together, we can break it. Kale hesitated, his gaze drifting to the amulet. How? What can we do? Alara knelt beside him, taking the amulet in her hands. There's a ritual and ancient rite that can sever the curse at its source, but it requires a great sacrifice. Kale's eyes met hers, understanding dawning. A sacrifice? Of what? Alara looked into the distance, where the shadows seemed to gather, waiting. A life freely given, the purest of hearts, and tainted by the curse. The one who wields the amulet must offer themselves to the darkness, to banish it forever. Kale's expression hardened. Then it has to be me. Alara shook her head, tears filling her eyes. No, Kale, you've already sacrificed so much. It should be me. But Kale stood, his resolve strengthening. This curse has taken everything from these people. It's time someone fought back. And if that means giving up my life, then so be it. I came to Grim Hollow to escape my past, to find a new life. But maybe this is why I was really brought here, to end the curse once and for all. Alara's heart ached, but she knew Kale was right. He had always been the one meant to do this, the one pure enough to break the cycle of darkness. She placed the amulet in his hands, the silver glowing brighter as it responded to his touch. Thank you, Kale, she whispered. You'll be remembered as a hero. Kale nodded, then stepped forward, facing the heart of the darkness. He held the amulet high, its light shining like a beacon. The shadows recoiled, hissing and writhing as the light grew stronger. Kale began to speak the incantation Alara had taught him, his voice clear and unwavering. The words carried through the Vale, resonating with a power older than the curse itself. As he spoke, the ground trembled, and the shadows screamed in agony. The amulet flared with blinding light, and Kale felt a warmth spreading through his body. The darkness closed in around him, trying to pull him under, but he stood firm, his will unbreakable. With a final, powerful word, Kale completed the incantation. The light from the amulet exploded outward, washing over the entire forest. The shadows evaporated, the whisper silenced, and the curse centuries old was finally broken. In that moment, Kale felt a peace he had never known. The darkness within him lifted, and he knew that his sacrifice had been worth it. As the light faded, the veil began to dissolve, the twisted landscape returning to its natural state. Alara watched as Kale's form began to fade, his body becoming one with the light. She wanted to cry out to stop him, but she knew this was the only way. Kale smiled at her, a look of gratitude and peace on his face, before he disappeared completely, leaving only the amulet behind. When Alara returned to Grim Hollow, the village was transformed. The fog that had hung over it for so long had lifted, and the air was clear and fresh. The villagers emerged from their homes, looking around in wonder as they realized that the curse was gone. Alara held the amulet close to her heart, a symbol of Kel's sacrifice and the courage it took to face the darkness. She knew that Grim Hollow would never forget him, and that his story would be told for generations to come. As the sun rose over the village, bathing it in golden light, Alara smiled for the first time in years. The curse had been broken, and Grim Hollow was finally free. The shadow of the past had been lifted, and a new future awaited them all. And somewhere, in a place beyond the veil of life and death, Kale found peace, knowing that he had fulfilled his destiny and brought an end to the darkness that had haunted Grim Hollow for so long.